the spirit of LeBron James, I say I'm just a kid from southwestern Michigan. I'm not sure what all the fuss is. So I'm just going to take this turnout as a sign that there's curiosity. So that means I'll try to do a sort of standard summary and then let the Q&A take it from there, so that I can leave room for the curiosity. Like, what in particular are you curious about? Let's start in a spirit of prayer together. Spirit, be present in our awareness. Help us to tune in to your ever-present reality that's in us, that's around us, that's between us. Help us to magnify it in the speaking and the listening so that there is good news for the world. Amen. Amen. So I think it's something like, tell us about you. And I assume there's something about your journey in there. So let's see what story I would tell at this point. Let's see, I was born in southwestern Michigan. Does anyone have any experience of southwestern Michigan? There's actually a person in this congregation who went to high school, was from my hometown and graduated. I couldn't believe it. I was born in Niles, Michigan. Anybody know?
Where Sawyer is?
Sure, Sawyer's in Berrien County.
That's where my family's reunion center is. Place.
Right, so we were on the eastern side of the county. Sawyer's practically next to the lake, isn't it? It's close.
We're on the lake,
Yeah, my parents moved up to St. Joe about 34 years ago, shocking me by leaving the home I grew up in. What? And they love it. And they're still there. So I was the third of three boys. My parents had kids very young. My mother married my father on her 16th birthday. So we got started early. It took me a while as a kid to do the math on that. So my parents had stayed together all those years, but they were a high school pregnancy, finished high school. And I was the last one. My mom was done having kids at 23. 22. So they're still together in year 60-something, 66. And living in the same county that I grew up in Berrien County. We grew up in Niles, which is about 11 miles north of South Bend, Indiana. Any Notre Dame graduates here? I used to work on campus, and Notre Dame was a place you went for concerts, so I could list off all the great 70s rock bands. Any Boston fans? Foreigner? Wow, going back. So yeah, South Bend was our town for movies and malls and big events, watching and hoping that the Irish would get beat on their own ice. In Berrien County, you either love the Irish or you hate them. There's no middle ground. So we had members of the family on either side. So I was born and raised in a United Methodist Church. Church was not a choice. It was like school. Sunday, get up, get dressed, we're going to church. If I was lucky, or so I thought, we didn't have to go to Sunday school. I could just suffer through the worship services and the pastor talking. That's hard for a young one to get. Yeah, so there was a lot of stability growing up. My parents graduated from the same high school. There were, in that old way, there were a lot of relatives around, a half-hour drive. We were at my grandmother's. And even shorter at my mother's, or my father's grandmother. And I walked to school. Who has stories about how high the snow was when you walked to school? Yeah. So from where we lived, I walked to school throughout. They were all reachable by foot. I'm sure that was a plan of my parents, because we had one car, one bathroom, all five of us in that house. We were the first to go to college. Education was very important to my parents, particularly my mother, but I think my dad was right in there. So I was Methodist, so I ended up going to a Northwestern, finished second in the voting, and Albion College finished first. Any Britons here? Wow, that's so cool. You'd think, all 1,800 students in the student body. It's about 2 hours away. It's a small school, one of many of the Great Lakes Colleges Association that some of you know and may have been to those in the Midwest, certainly out east, but in the Midwest, all these colleges that were founded in the 19th century by churches. They're all over the place. Michigan has plenty, Indiana, Ohio, Illinois, Wisconsin, Minnesota, all of them. So I went there as a mass communications major because I had been working at a radio station as a senior in high school at the absolute bottom of the disc jockey world. Does anyone know where that puts you?
Overnight.
4 a.m. on Sunday morning. So I would show up at the old offices of WNDU. We figure those letters out, NDU? Notre Dame University, right on campus. And push the button, the buzzer, knock on the door, and the FM jock would come and open the door. Hopefully. I had some mornings. I did have a morning where I was out there, middle of winter, waiting, half hour in the cold. So I thought I was going to be a mass comm major, and by the end of my freshman year, I'd switch to religious studies. Because?
Girl.
That's a really good guess. I was entirely capable of that. Because faith was important to me. And faith really came to me not because church was required, but because, I'm going to tell the story this way, there are other ways to tell it, but because when I was 13, maybe you were out when I was 12, we had this kind of dynamic youth pastor who showed up at Wesley United Methodist Church. That's one of the common, in our world it's First Congregational or Plymouth or Salem or some such thing. In the Methodist world it's Wesley or a number of other common names. And Mike showed up at Wesley and started actually opening the Bible to us. And what became important to me is that he showed me a different way of living. As to say, here's what Jesus said, here's what he did. It's like, open your Bible, look. He would share some lessons. And even at that age, even in junior high school, I could see that I was already participating in the worst of junior high school life. It was 7, 8, and 9 when I was in the school system way back when, some of you remember that.
Yes.
So 7th grade was the big year. And I could see already, Jesus was living this way, I was doing this. Checking the popularity polls, piling on when it seemed advantageous, getting close when it seemed advantageous. And our youth director came in Sunday school, basically opened up the scriptures and said, this is a way to live. And you have to make a choice. And at 13, that was actually age appropriate. I'm like, whoa. I think some part of me developmentally was ready for, I guess, yeah, I'm in 7th grade. Help me walk to different classes, The stirrings of autonomy. And so I realized I was not in a good way. And at 13, I got saved in the old-fashioned sinner's prayer way. Anybody else at some point in their life? Jesus Christ, personal Lord and Savior. I did that at 13, and it meant a great deal, and it still does. It still does. So I'm eternally grateful, no pun intended there, to Dr. Mike West, who was out there somewhere working on genes and telomeres. Anyone doing research on telomeres? That's what Mike does now. And I was very fortunate because as I grew, so did my faith. I was fortunate to go on a UN and Washington, D.C. trip with the Methodist Church at 18, which my brother had done. And that got me a little bit radicalized, I'll tell you. It helped. I was already thinking this whole Reagan Revolution thing was a little suspect, not quite right. Something's not right here. And then when we went to these places that the Methodist Church had set up in New York, and certainly their offices in D.C., which they now share with the United Church, we rent space from them. They're a little bigger than us. Right across from the Supreme Court. I began to see that, as Wesley had imagined, this faith is supposed to be all-encompassing. It's for your whole life, it's at the center, and it's for the world. That is to say, things out in the world need to follow this too. It's not just a personal morality code. So that really got me moving, and that's why it was important for me, even in college. It's one of the reasons I chose Alvin, because I knew they had a religious studies department. I thought, well, I'm kind of into this stuff. This is really good for me. I'll figure out what to do, because the last thing I would want to do for a job is be a pastor. Worst possible outcome. Pastors are weird. They dress badly. They are so uncool. Bad polyester pants, and the worst attempts to be hip with the youth. Hey, man! It's like, oh my Lord, please, just go talk to the adults and leave us alone. Mike's taking care of it. Yeah, so by the time I got done with the Albion, I realized, well, actually halfway through, I realized I'm going to need a job, I think. So I found this profession called exercise physiology. Anybody heard of that before? Got a few hands, all right. I hope so. So I started getting my prerequisites in order with the phys ed department and things, and then took my graduate record examination, isn't that what they call it, the GRE? And I was so fortunate because I had no plan B. There was zero plan B. I had no idea what one would do with a religious studies degree undergrad. So I got a tuition scholarship from the University of Arizona. Nothing, huh? Bear down, go Cats, nothing.
We're in California.
It's true, I see that, okay. It's out there. And so that was a great growth for me, both in terms of, in a sense, intellectually, to go deeper into the science world. I loved it. And fortunately, I had a roommate who was a science undergrad, and John helped me through advanced ex-phys class, which he had taken in Madison. And I really love that world. I did an internship in cardiac rehab. Love that world. A lot of people get better after cardiac events, so it's a very encouraging world. It's a fascinating world. Very different than the late 80s. So out I went, and soon after getting out there, I realized the world was already flooded with exercise physiologists. Are you sure? Because I really like this. So a couple years later, in the hospital I was working at in a wellness department in Muskegon, Michigan, they cut our whole department. We had 3 people in a wellness department. They just said, we don't have a wellness department anymore. This is another side conversation in the sad chapter of how we pay for health care and how we don't. So I thought, well, I can tell just by this time with people that information is not what makes people better, or at least it's a pretty minor player. We could tell people all sorts of things about weight management, about cholesterol management, about all of that, and it didn't actually make a change. We had a lot of repeat customers. So I went to an academically oriented seminary to be a professor, to research religion and health. Is religion really a positive, life-giving force? Will we see any correlations? And being Methodist, there were a couple of those that I knew of. One is in Southern California. Claremont.
That's where I wanted to go to school.
Yeah, Claremont.
Unfortunately,
What an amazing campus. The undergrad schools, the graduate school, and the School of Theology. With a great reputation. But while I was there was a little aftershock, and a Michigan kid said, "No way. This is just wrong." So I had learned to ski by then. That's what I did to cope with winter in Michigan, to downhill ski by then. And so ILIF offered at least half a ride, and I said, "I'll take it." And off to Denver I went to be a professor. Meanwhile, Spirit is laughing her ass off. This kid thinks he's coming here to be a professor. It's cheaper to go to grad school through a seminary because of the church support than just to go for a master's degree in religious studies elsewhere. So within the first year, I'd gone from I'm going to be a professor to this feeling that clergy often get when the call finally hooks them. It's like, oh, I'm called to the ministry. Oh, so obvious. It's like a kind of conviction, like you just know it's right, but you also know you've been fighting it for a long time. So I got halfway with the Methodists in Michigan and then transferred out to the Rocky Mountain Conference and went through seminary that way. And then by the time I was out of seminary, about a year, I just kind of woke up and realized I'm not a Methodist anymore, which was a shock. Whole family Methodist. And feeling that family pattern in me was one of my first real deep sense of, wow, that's a really deep groove. It is hard to even get this out of my mouth to my family. I'm leaving. But I'd had a very negative experience with a bishop trying to get me placed in two churches, and you'll never guess where. Oregon. I wasn't ordained yet, but the bishop was desperate because that's their responsibility to fill their pulpits. And two little churches, which were, they call them yoked parishes, or a multi-point charge. They have fancy language for it. Not far from here. Any guesses?
Forest Grove.
Surely.
Forest Grove's another story.
Yeah.
The ever happy town name of Drain.
I did youth group at that Methodist church.
They wanted me there in 1993 after seminary. Drain in Yoncalla. We had a parsonage and everything, and my partner at the time, we went down and visited because we had to say yes first, which is my first clue about this is a messed up system for me. You have to say yes first just to meet the people. Came down there, my partner at the time said, "There's no way. There's no way." So I had to make the dreaded call to the bishop, basically and rescind my word, which was really painful, and that was my first clue, and really all I needed to say, this system is not good for me. It's not a good family system to have a bishop who really functions as a parent. That's up to me and my family to discern where Spirit's moving. And I'm not going to give that away to a bishop. I would rather have the responsibility that goes with the freedom of that. If I make a mistake, then I know who to talk to. But if the bishop puts me somewhere, that's one of the problems. There's an easy target. You did this to me, to my family. And then in the 1992 General Conference of the United Methodist Church, we had an opportunity, back then I was part of that week, to move forward on gay and lesbian liberation. And we were very hopeful, especially at a place like ILIF, which is a very progressive seminary. And they did the opposite. And that's when a lot of us sort of knew we had that feeling like, this is never going to happen. I just woke up from a kind of delusion. Because of the way they're organized, because of the way the voting blocks are, because it's an international church with votes coming from Africa, traditional societies, not to mention the southeast of the U.S., we realized the votes will never be there. This will never happen. It doesn't matter how much we say things, how many posters we hold up, how many rainbow flags we put on us. This is not in the politics. It's set up for this. So many of us left. I can I don't know how many colleagues I have. I don't know how much talent the United Methodist Church has bled over the decades. It continues, and now what's happening with them now is what we knew back then. There's a messy divorce out there, just a matter of time, and now they're doing it. I walked into a UCC January 1st, 1995, and I've never regretted it one day. I walked into the best named church that's now closed, poor little church in the mountains, Wild Rose United Church. Perfect. They lost their pastor soon after I came, so they had me and another guy who'd gone through seminary run worship. Worship sometimes had 6 people. We had 15, we were thrilled. But I was living and working up in the mountains. I'd fallen in love with the mountains. And that was where I started, and it'll always have a great place in my heart.
What state?
What's that?
What state?
I'm sorry, I should have filled it in. It's outside of Denver.
I thought so.
It's between, the church was actually in Evergreen. I lived in Conifer, which are southwest of Denver, up Highway 285, or if you want to get to Evergreen, you go up I-70. Or if you're having fun, you go up the back way through Morrison and Kittredge. It's Colorado speak, anybody? Yeah, that's right. So what have I left out? Looking at the time, I better wrap it up to get to Q&A. So I can see what you're curious about. One of the things that's important to say that has to do with me leaving the United Methodist Church is this growth of self-authoring, my wife would call it, who knows a lot about human development. And we all have our painful things, and for me the painful thing has been intimate relationship. So that's been with women for me. I've had a lot of partners, and I'm in my 4th marriage. So I went to seminary married. I didn't even make it through seminary. Then I got into a rebound marriage, which was even shorter than the first one. And then I was with someone for 14 years and found out, at the end of 14 years, never wanted to be a pastor's spouse. Oh, poor detail. Really should have talked about that one. So Alice, I'll save all the gory details and all the things I've had to learn painfully, but Alice and I have been together for 10 years, married for 8. We just celebrated our 8th anniversary. And we're super happy to be together, really love working together as well. So I'll stop there, and I just want to hear questions. I do need a volunteer to bring the mic around. This is a chance for servant leadership. Here we go. We'll get to as many questions as possible if there are that many.
Could you tell us a little bit about your life now
My life.
in Colorado and what you're doing?
Yeah, so it was Roger who said it's all going to come out today. So one of the fun and crazy truths is that my wife and I we met online, chemistry.com, I'm not kidding. And by then I had been doing online dating, I got really efficient, nope. I just learned that if there wasn't some sort of spark, then it was never going to happen. And her pictures came out.
Excuse me, Susie, I think you need to turn that one off. We're getting feedback.
Yeah, between, sure. So I just saw this woman's picture with the eyes, and I said, who is that? Whoa. It was immediate. And so in that spirit, I can say, we started calling, she was out of town, and then when she finally got back, and we had our first date, and it was pretty epic. And I'll save all the details, but it was like I knew, oh man, I'm into something here. This is significant. 3 months later, we bought a house together. I cannot even imagine what my parents were thinking. This child, we love that house. We're still there. We knew when we walked into it. 30 seconds inside, we're like, this is it. This is our house. I didn't have to see the rest of it. We just walked in yeah, this is it. So we live a little bit outside of Boulder, about a 12-minute drive down to North Boulder. And at the time I was serving a church in Denver, Washington Park United Church of Christ, as their senior pastor, and was there for 7.5 years. When Spirit, my wife is a mystic and she gets a lot of messages, and Spirit came through to her, Magdalene, and Jesus came through and said, it's time for you two to start working together. Because we had a nice parallel path. Her path was great, respected it, great. You do yours, I do mine, that's the deal. So that was a big shocker. We didn't even know what that meant. And we just kept kind of trying to figure out what the cues and clues were to what that meant. And over the years, it's just grown and grown. I'm saying that in relationship to the house because now we do the work at the house mostly, except for the pilgrimages. So it's another story, really the last several years for me. It's been going on for a while. I've been on this journey of learning to surrender. I grew up in a household of planning. My parents, I would put them in the Super Bowl of planning. And it works for them. They have planned, they have saved money, they've done all these things, and so many things have worked out for them, and I'm thrilled for them. It was important for what they came from. They came from more chaos. And so they, my dad always had work, and they always saved, and things. And because they started so early, they have 8 great-grandchildren at this point, which is a great blessing. But I got in this place where part of my story, especially any Enneagram people here, okay. The one path is my best way my frequent way to forget who I truly am. So I do the one style of forgetting with a 9 wing. And that's a kind of perfectionism, but mine came flavored with a kind of planning and, keep it together. And of course that's useful. But the other side of planning is emergence. I'm trying to teach this to leadership here and everywhere. I learned it from my wife, this polarity thing. Remember the sermon on and?
Yes.
That's polarity work, and. There's planning and emergence. And so the last many years have been emergence for me in all sorts of forms. Buying a house after 3 months with this woman. Hearing this call, and then sort of figuring out, well, what does that mean? And then just following the steps. And so now we've been called into basically what we thought it was going to be about teaching about sacred union, which is much more than just 2 partners together. It's about what's in the self, what's in relationships, and what's in society. You could use Jungian language of masculine and feminine as a master archetype, that we need both sides of that equation, and we see that this culture has been masculine archetype energy dominated, feminine's been repressed and neglected. So we thought we were going to teach a lot about that, and Spirit just kind of chuckled at that and said, I don't know what you're teaching. I want you to lead people into experiences where they can discover what's in the way of getting to the neglected pole, you might say, in the theoretical. I found that over the years, and it's helped my preaching, which, God love all the places like Forest Grove where I started. It took me a long time to get through the UCC process, like 7 years from the time I left the Methodist to finally getting to a church. That's another story, but Forest Grove called me, and those people would have heard me give lots of really great seminary papers. But it took me years to learn that's not a sermon. That's just a thought and an interesting theory and probably worth something. But it doesn't help people, it doesn't meet people energetically in their lives where they are. So that's
an example of emergence.
Yes. Emergence is anything that simply emerges in the moment that's like unexpected. An example would be that very thing. So when I did Forest Grove for 4 years. My ex-wife was very unhappy. She hated small towns. Forest Grove was not working for her. So eventually, because I told her I've got to go somewhere, I can't get a job in Colorado. There aren't that many places for associate pastors, which is what everybody seems to want me for. So she agreed and went, And I finally got to a place, she was just so unhappy. I just said, I tell you what, if you can get a job, I mean, I had my own experience at a particularly powerful retreat that I now lead called the Inner King Training. I said, I came back from that and I said, if you can get a job in Boulder, we'll go back. And she did, and so we did. I did campus ministry a couple of years, and then went to Laramie to do an interim up there. They'd had a train wreck in their church, metaphorically. But then I came back after that and got called to the church that sponsored me for ordination, the Washington Park UCC, in the Wash Park neighborhood of Denver. I was thrilled. Coming home. I love these people. They help me out so much. I love what they're doing, very justice-oriented place. And I thought, well, this is it. I don't have to look for work anymore. We'll have a nice party 25 years from now and talk about all the great things we did together. It'll be great. Just like the guy who was kind of one of my helpers and mentors there. And that was my plan. What emerged was a series of events that ended, 7.5 years in, when Spirit just got right up close and said, you're done here. There's nothing else to be exchanged. You've given, they've given. The exchange is complete. No problem. But it's like this chapter is just over. And that emerged over time. It certainly emerged powerfully after I came back from a sabbatical. And so that's one big form of emergence. I arrived there with a plan and another partner. By the time 7.5 years left, I was in another house with Allison, married to her, and Spirit said, you're done doing settled ministry. I was like, what? I hate looking for work. And Spirit does that nice thing and says, I hear you. That's nice. I'm sorry. Off you go. It's a gentle, no compromise. That's emergence. That's one big example for me. And so, actually, that's still true. I don't like looking for work. On the other hand, if I'm willing to be uncomfortable in that not knowing, because in planning, my parents always knew, and they still know in some ways. If I can sit with a not knowing, things happen, and I have these amazing new adventures. University Church in Seattle, I've never done that. Plymouth Church in Fort Collins. First Congregational of Eugene. I'm meeting all these people. Not to mention coming into this discovery of, oh, by the way, because the other worst possible outcome was not pastor. It was when I went to seminary, for example, I saw this married couple who were going to co-pastor, and I said, that's the worst possible outcome. Working with your spouse. And so that's another, I can name lots of forms of emergence. One is, I love working with my spouse. I did not see that coming at all. And so in the sacred union work we do, which seems to be directed right now toward potent experiences, we've come with two, and one is pilgrimage, which is the newest. So we took the pilgrimage to France, super powerful, amazing. But before that, especially for a kid who waited until he was 21 to drink beer, grad school, I'm finally, let's have a picture and some pizza. Great place off campus in Tucson, I could go there right now. Somehow plant medicine came in. And this is totally unexpected for me. Like, I don't have any exposure. What is this? What's going on? But my own experience being guided by others and being in ceremonies, I realized there's something powerful here. And this is now part of my prayer life, at times, periodically. And so those were huge. Those are part of our life now, doing this work. Still living in the same house, flying back like I'm doing this afternoon, and still doing that work and figuring out where's this work leading. That's kind of our life. I do have 2 stepsons, that's probably important to mention. So, great gift to me. Knew them as teenagers, and now they're 27 and 23. One lives near us, one far away. David.
When you were talking about cardiac recovery, have you heard of the Institute of Heart Math?
Yes.
And I don't know how familiar you are, but Do you see them as a way of popularizing spiritual growth?
I don't know enough about them to know, but it's very possible. I think there was a guy in our pilgrimage who had done some teaching for them, if I'm thinking of the same group. Yeah, I don't know enough about what they do. Allison probably knows more. Yeah. Did I answer your question all the way, Lori? Okay. Chris?
We don't have too much time, but I wanted to find out, how do you go about preparing for your sermons, which are very good? I have a sense that maybe you spend as much time thinking about it as writing it, but I could be wrong. But I just wondered how you seek some other deeper source to deliver your message.
What can I say about that? There's a mystery to it, and there's also a discipline to it. It's both. And I've learned that over the years. I've tried different things over the years. You know, and I've had plenty of it's like, wow, that doesn't work. I'll stop doing that. So I tried for a while to be more spontaneous and just have a few notes, and I realized it doesn't work. Drift, go too long. It doesn't work. So I would say there's a discipline that I do, which is I need to know certainly by Monday. I need to have something by Monday. I can't think it up on Thursday or, God forbid, Saturday, my Lord. That's just crazy. For me, I'm not saying for everybody, say for me, what do I need to do to help have something of value? So it has to start on Monday, and I have to kind of do some biblical work first. And this is when I'm starting from scratch. I have to have some core, and so I learned that I have to have one central point, and this is what I've learned as well. One point, one story, one image. Stop. That's it. And now I even know how many words that is. Like on a word count. If I'm over 2,000 words, no, I'm not that good. I had to learn that too. I've watched some other great preachers preach in person. I've been fortunate that way. A couple of preaching conferences, General Synod, we had Otis Moss III. Anyone know Otis Moss III? Whoa, lights out, major league, top shelf. Him, me, not the same. And that's okay. There are gifted ones who can preach that long and that well, and that's fine, it's beautiful. I'm with them. So I just had to learn me and learn the churches I was in and realize there's a container and there's a sweet spot. And I got to work through it, and then by Thursday I need to have it done, because every once in a while I actually get a 5-day work week. Sunday to Thursday, every once in a while. So that's the goal, to have it done. And as my wife knows, I have Thursday done. That's a status. It's Thursday done. I have to revisit it Sunday morning, in the moment, and go over it one more time and realize, oh, no, that's not quite right. I have to be in the space at the time to finish the last 5 or 10%. And there's a whole other part that I can't really explain, and that's just life. I'll be 60 in September. There's no way I could preach the same things at 40 that I can preach at 60. I just don't have those. I didn't have those understandings. So I had to have them marked. Had to go through the things, the divorces, to see the world and what's happened. Just had to go through a lot of stuff to be able to see and learn and put that all together. And that's what I would say. There's a short discipline, I could say, it kind of goes like this during the week. But there's also a bigger thing that's like, oh, it just kind of goes like this. I can't. If I had the same habit at 40, it would have helped, but it wouldn't have produced the things that I do now. That's what I would say.
I play a game with people that, outside of work, what are you really, really good at?
Skiing, downhill skiing. I'm a really good skier. One of the things I did between churches was I was a ski bum. Anyone been a lifty? I ran the Indian Peaks lift at the Eldora Mountain Ski Resort, which is our local ski resort outside of Boulder. It's up near Nederland. And I ran that, and that is a great thing to do once. I will never do it again. I got really strong, my skiing got really fantastic, And it is a mind-numbing day after day of repetition that only needs to be done once. Once a year. Yeah. And I once was good at baseball.
What position?
By high school and college, I was an outfielder. When you're young, you're always the pitcher and the catcher. But as you grow older, they start to move you away from those until you stop. So my stopping place was go out there. I was good at that point. Now I can't run. So, what other questions?
What do you wish you were good at?
Question, what do I wish I was good at? Financial planning, probably. A couple more minutes here.
At the beginning, you mentioned the schools that were founded by churches.
Uh-huh.
And I have dreamed about us founding a school. Sorry, did I say churches? I meant churches founding schools. And I have dreamed about us founding a school in conjunction with other people. Is that even a realistic hope anymore? Or is that just too big, too hard?
I don't know. That's out of my realm. For one, this church, if that's who you're referring to, we have started a school. It's right down there.
Yes, I'm meaning like building on that.
I don't know, because the Forest Grove Church started an orphanage because so many parents died on the Oregon Trail. The orphanage became kind of a school, and then another school, and then Pacific University. But that was in a time where there was real estate for that. I mean, metaphorically. There wasn't anything, so something was needed. So I guess it would depend on, is there a need? And can you find the resources? Other than that, I wouldn't know how to answer that. Yeah. I know one of my mentors talked a lot about it, the failures of the school system, not as a reactionary, but Matthew Fox. My major theological influences are Matthew Fox, who's a former Catholic, now Anglican priest, Episcopal priest, who centers his theology on creation, spirituality, and original blessing. So the first story we have in Scripture ends with blessing. This is very good. And basically says, and I'm in total agreement, if we started with that story as our primary story, it changes everything afterward. And most of what we've regretted about being church over the centuries would not theoretically have happened because we wouldn't have had a theology to justify it. Because you start with blessing, and you worry about sin second instead of first. What he calls redemption theology, which is obsessed with that. And that gets you all sorts of distortions, which I agree with. You start with blessing and then you get somewhere else. And then other people like Richard Rohr and lots of others over the years. I could name Sharon Welch from Harvard. The name escapes me right now. Who wrote Metaphorical Theology?
Harvey Cox.
No, she was at Vanderbilt. Her name escapes me right now. She wrote Metaphorical Theology, and that was a revolution for me. And then people in the process theology movement like Charles Hartshorne, who were basically willing to say there's no problem of why is there evil because God can't control everything. That's a Greek philosophical absolute. He said it's not in the Scriptures. God is super powerful, but things happen. And so that was even from when bad things happen to good people, from the great rabbi, who I know has experienced that. So I trusted their looking at things, and that made sense to me. So I tend to be that kind of theologian. I tend to be very pragmatic, and basically that seems true. And if I believe that, it seems to work. It seems to keep me moving in life. That's one of my main theological tests. Does that work? Does that move us forward? Does that help people when they lose a spouse? Does that help us when we're facing whatever we're facing? And usually, if I get a yes, I'll say, well, there you go. has some truth in it, so I'll keep it until it doesn't anymore. And then I'll find another model. It's almost time. One more question.
You mentioned plant medicine, and I was wondering if you've ever read The Sacred Mushroom and the Cross.
Not yet, I'm aware of it. I've read something called Psychedelic Gospels, which is from a professor in Florida International, somewhere in Florida, teaching.
So the question is really about how do you marry religious philosophies and
Plant
plant
medicine.
medicine in today's world where
Well, first of all, it's never been divorced in many indigenous societies. And people have been using plant medicine for thousands of years. We have evidence to maybe 8,000 years. So there's some places where that's not a question. It's like, well, how wouldn't you? Like, of course, like it wouldn't even be hard to understand. And I'm part of a movement of some who are trying to understand what it means for the West. So Brian Mareski's book, The Immortality Key, is important. It's a 400-pager. It's a pretty big deal, pretty hefty. But he's done a lot of the research around archaeology, Vatican archives, to show that the West did have a tradition with the Eleusinian mysteries in Greece, and then it's likely that that got transferred to some early Christians. There's no perfect proof of that, but there's some highly suggestive stuff. And the Psychedelic Gospels is another book by this guy in Florida who went with his wife, and they documented all the art in Europe, these chapels in different places, where like the hem of the garment of Jesus is full of psilocybin mushrooms. There's art, it's right there. And we just got back from a chapel, this might have been in, I think it was that Lane? Which village was that? Chapel, behind glass, there she is, Black Madonna, holding the baby, and in her other hand, up front, not hidden, mushroom. She's holding it right out. Right there. So it's been funny to hear the other explanations. Oh, that's a this. And I'm looking at it going, that's a mushroom. Yeah.
Can I just make a request?
Yes.
Maybe at some time, could you share about your pilgrimage to France?
Yeah, so there is a plan to share about the pilgrimage. The caveat to that, the forewarning is there's a lot of it that's like, you just had to be here. I can't. And I can share what I can share. So we plan to do that. My wife and I will put together a PowerPoint or something. Show you some images. Yeah. So I've got to go. There's something else to do this morning. Thank you.
You'll be playing.